Good morning once again. I'm your tutor for English Communication B. My name is Elizabeth Chimwaza and welcome to your examination-based contact class for English Communication B. Before we start, let me just give you some exam tips. There are many different factors to consider when looking at how to make the most of English study time. So compiling a definite list of tasks when studying might be a difficult task. For a start, every student is different, so perhaps the first and most important tip when studying is to know your own individual strengths and weaknesses. Analyze the things that make study for you. Adapt your study regime to suit you. Every paper has got some examination instructions. So before you start writing your exam, you need to read the instructions carefully. The examination paper consists of instructions that guides you on how many questions to answer. For example, write legibly. This means you need to write clearly and neatly. Write with a blue or black pen. Plan your time per question so that at the end of the day, you don't have more questions that are not answered because of poor time management. Structure your answers through headings and numbers and logical sequencing. Always make sure that you number each question as it appears on the question paper. Do not put your own numbers. Answer all questions or answer any questions, meaning if the instruction is answer all the questions, you have to answer all the questions. If the instruction is answer any questions, you have to choose the ones that you prefer to answer. Let's quickly look at the learning outcomes for this particular guide. After this session, you should be able to describe the criteria of communications, understand good listening and questioning skills, understand the writing of an affidavit statement, describe the basic protocol duties and responsibility for different units, speeches, and official visits. Number 1, different methods and use of communication. Distinguish between a fact and an opinion. What is an opinion? Opinion is based on personal feelings, beliefs, or ways of thinking about a certain topic. Things that are believed to have been and had to be true. For example, this lady appears to be rich and lovely, therefore she is innocent. That is an opinion. Avoid use of the following phrases: I think that, I believe that. Facts. What are facts? Facts are based on objectives, based on hard facts, for example, hard evidence. Things known for certain to exist. Based on her course marks, she is going to pass with a distinction. In this example, we have hard facts, or we have hard evidence, which is a course mark. So it becomes a fact because there is evidence. The example is based on her course mark, she is going to pass with a distinction. Effective communication. What is communication? Transfer of information from one person to another. Communication is a two-way process, which means there is sending of information and there is receiving of information. So information is a two-way process, and also communication, you need to give back feedback. Information can be ideas, expressions, and feelings. Let's move on to communication barriers. For communication to be successful, such barriers may be overcome. But before I explain these barriers, let me just quickly explain what is communication barriers. Communication barriers, these are things that hinder communication to be successful. So, communication barriers can be grouped into social barriers, psychological barriers, physical barriers. So in your exam, you need to know if it is a social barrier. You need to be able to give an example of a social barrier. You need to be able to give an example of a psychological barrier. You also need to give an example of a physical barrier. Different types of communication. Operating a two-way radio system is an art which personality plays an important part. How to improve skills in the use of a two-way radio system. There are two basic considerations when talking on the air. Number one, what to say, that is your voice procedure. Number two, how to say it, that is your voice technique. Pro words. Pro words are used to indicate specific meaning. They have been assigned for a specific meaning. They can speed up message handling on radio networks. For example, break. It means interruption to a transmission. Go ahead. It means I am ready to copy your message. Phonetic alphabet. Words are spelled phonetically to avoid confusion. If you see in your module guide, there is a list of phonetic alphabet that are used in your profession. So you need to study the phonetic alphabet and know it so that you don't get a confusion when it comes to the exam. So we also use phonetic alphabet for security purposes in our career. An example, TAC should be spoken as Echo Tango Alpha. TAC should be spoken as Echo Tango Alpha. This is an example of the phonetic alphabet that we use. Methods of communication. There are several methods of communication. The first one we are going to look at is the written word. Written word can be letters, memos, reports, proposals, statements, and contracts. Spoken word. Spoken word can be conversations, interviews, meetings, phone calls, and announcements. We also have visual images. These are photographs, paintings, drawings, and logos. We also have symbolic gestures. This can be facial expressions, body language, tone, posture, etc. So in the exam, if you see a question which says, list and explain methods of communication, you have to explain what is written communication, what is spoken word, what is visual images, what is symbolic gestures, using examples. So you can add your own examples or you can use these ones. Combination of methods. Example of a question: briefly explain the method of communication you may use during the following chain of events in a murder investigation. So if you get a question which says, briefly explain the methods of communication, you first look at the scenario that you are given. You are given a chain of events in a murder investigation. So the first method is the crime is reported. So the crime is reported, that it means it is spoken. Processing of the crime scene. You have to go and you visualize the crime scene. Interview of eyewitnesses. So this is the chain of events, the methods of communication that you can explain. Good telephone usage. We all know that practice makes perfect. When you're talking on the telephone, you always have to be polite and friendly. Time your calls to make sure you don't overrun. Smile. A smiling voice invites a positive response. Listening and questioning skills. Listening skills. Listening requires more focus on hearing. It involves observing body language and noticing inconsistencies between verbal and non-verbal messages. Listening requires concentration and using your senses in addition to simply hearing the spoken word. Listening requires concentration and using your senses in addition to simple hearing the spoken word. Different types of listening skills. Empathizing, that is drawing out the speaker and obtaining information in a supportive, helpful way. Analyzing, that is looking for actual information. Synthesizing, proactively guiding the discussion towards an objective. We are now going to look at sample questions and how to answer them. The first one is briefly explain the skimming, the scanning, and the intensive reading methods. Such a question requires a lot of marks, so you need to write as much information as possible. So this question, it means it needs to be divided into three. First, you explain the skimming method, you go on to the scanning reading method, and you end with the intensive reading method. So you explain how you do skimming reading method. You explain the scanning in detail. You also explain the intensive reading method in detail. Underline the key words and observe the thinking levels of a verb. You can get a paragraph that requires you to underline the key words, or you can get a paragraph that has verbs in it and you need to observe the thinking level of the verb. Explain all the three items chronologically. What it simply means if you get such a question is whatever items that you get, you have to explain them chronologically. You might also get a question, a multiple choice question, which says, what is not a rule of an apostrophe? You can get options, for example, add the apostrophe to plural dates, add the apostrophe to an S and an S to singular nouns, add an apostrophe and an S to singular proper nouns if the word ends with an S. So in this instance, we have to choose the correct option. And we can choose the correct option by putting a circle around the answer that you think is correct. So, if there is any problem or if there is anything that you didn't understand in this session, please contact me on zabe.chim@yahoo.com. That is my email address. Or you can call me on 0817-356-991. That is on 0817-356-991. I wish you all the best in your upcoming exam.